All right, good morning. Thank you all for joining the session. I'm Lakshman, partner in PwC. I manage our tech and analytics for financial services. I'm really excited to have Matt and Solomon, the risk technology leadership of Capital One, join us. Matt is the managing vice president of product. He focuses on their product strategy. And then we have Solomon, who's the vice president of software engineering. He focuses on architecture, implementation, and building the risk decisioning platform. Now, I wrote the business case for this session, and part of the reason was because I work with a lot of other financial services institutions. Almost everyone chose to buy a vendor solutions. There are a number of solutions available in this space. Capital One had the forethought back in 2019 to build something natively in AWS. Now it's become more obvious because of the capabilities of AWS has evolved so much. And some of the vendor solutions are pretty restrictive, but we are seeing the benefits of that decision. So I thought we'll get them on the stage, have them speak about the process in which they went through. I have some questions prepared. I'm going to go through the questions, and towards the end, we'll open up for QA. So feel free to ask any questions in the end. I'll start with the first question, and then Matt and Solomon, feel free to introduce yourself as we get started. The first question is, Capital One is often described as a software company that happens to be a bank. How does that philosophy show up in your approach to governance, risk, and compliance? Start with you, Matt.
Sounds good. So as Lakshman said, I'm head of product management for risk management at Capital One, so responsible for all the software that we build that Capital One associates use to manage risks, ranging from things like investigating money laundering to to managing issues and events. And when I think about your question here, as you said, Capital One is a technology company. We happen to be a technology company in the financial services space. And we say, as a bank, risk management is our business. And we put those things together. One of the things Solomon and I really focus on is how can we transform risk management with technology? And I think that's how you get that alignment with the business and aligning risk, technology, compliance going forward. And yeah.
Solomon, anything you want to add to that?
Yes, thanks for having us. Like Lakshman said, I'm in Capital One. I've been with Capital One 14 years. I'm in the engineering space, building software in the risk space for the last 5-6 years. It's been pretty exciting. To answer, to the question itself, if you think about how at Capital One we look to solve problems for our business, it's fundamentally changed since we've become a cloud-native company. So while we've started to change our ways to approaching how we build software and solving business, the GRC problem comes along a few years ago, and then it was no different when we looked at it and said, is this a competitive advantage, and can we do it? And I think because of the journey we've been on our AWS journey and the risk, evolution of risk management, the confluence allowed us to, I think, start this GRC journey ourselves.
Thank you. Matt, next question for you. I want to talk about the initial vision. What is the North Star when you started building this platform?
Yeah. Our overarching goal is to build real-time intelligent risk management. I think a lot of risk management work and practice ends up being documenting things that have happened. But we want to have a platform that really helps people to proactively manage risks, anticipate things before they occur, minimize the impacts of things that do occur. And I think if we really focus on this theme of real-time intelligent, one, we'll deliver way better user experiences to all those people around Capital One that are using our software, and two, deliver way better risk management for the business.
Yeah, I remember working with you back in 2019 when none of the other banks, or at least the risk management tech, were not focused on user experience. That was a first thing that you guys focused on even before we came up with requirements. That was interesting. Anything you want to add, Solomon, about?
It's surprising at the number of users we have on our product. We have roughly 10,000 internal Capital One users who use our platform. So you think about building a software that is world-class for our internal customers. And not only is the software supposed to be world-class, but it's also forward-leaning, where we try to do things that are different than, if it's going to be the business, risk management is your business, the value we attach to the solution and the platform is a lot different. And that was, I think, a part of the vision, is it not to mimic what was already in the marketplace in this space. I think we have great products, of course, but what we wanted to set to achieve, the North Star that Matt talked about, that is truly something that doesn't exist. And we said, hey, we want to go there ourselves. So the vision is to provide a service for our 10,000 risk officers, or risk managers, if you would, at Capital One, a way to do their jobs better.
Okay. All right. Both of you mentioned risk being core to the business, right? And it's not just a control function. So how does that mindset influence the way you design technology? Solomon, you want to take that?
Yeah. So when we set on this path, what we realized was this is at an abstract level, an object model and design, right? You think about objects as risks, controls, issues, and events. So when we start to boil down an abstract at that level, we're like, hey, what does a system look like that is able to scale and be flexible with object handling? That's where we ended up. And that was the first version of the product, the first version of what we started to build out. And as we start to get into the 2023, 2024, a couple of years in, we realized the object relationships are critical. And all of a sudden, it allows us to interact or technically transact with these objects. That's where, if you look at the design, that's the design. What it has allowed us to do is it's allowed us to move from a product mindset to a platform mindset. So now that you have objects, you've created the relationships, and you're able to interact. Now your assessment is a transaction with these objects. And all of a sudden, these things become alive. And it's less and less like what we started off with, which was reactive risk management, to now the proactive. I think the next step is what Matt will hit on the vision stuff.
I think that's a great view, that architecture design. As I think about the user experience design, as I said, we have 10,000 users across the company, every line of business and every line of defense. We want our software to be so good that our product is in demand across the company. And you can tell me, but I'm guessing there aren't a lot of businesses out there where people love their risk management software. But we sort of set that as a goal we want to work backward from. Solomon referenced, we want world-class experiences. Capital One uses Net Promoter Scores to see how our credit card customers are feeling. We use Net Promoter Scores to see how our GRC users are feeling. And we've gone on a journey from way negative to mildly positive, but we're going to keep going until we have a product that people are demanding. And we want business leaders coming to us. So most of our users are not in the risk management organization. They're out in the business running the company. And I want them to say, this is a product, this is a platform that helps me do my job better. It helps me understand my risks better.
Yeah, I've not come across any other bank's risk technology having an NPS, and I've seen the tracking go higher and higher, which is amazing. And the other thing I've noticed, even for GRC used to be the old term. They changed to IRM, right? Integrated risk management. Even with the new cloud-native vendor products that are there, I've seen large financial institutions. Somebody is responsible for building the risk change management. Somebody else is for issues management, and they both create their own data model, creating duplicates, which was the traditional issue. And having the object model, so you have one set of risk, controls, regulations that's used across. I think that's makes the reporting and all that easy. So follow-up question, Solomon. So how does the real-time decision-making look like in practice for risk teams? And how did cloud-native design make that achievable?
So if you think about real-time, the need for real-time is now, right? So if you think about where we are as a species, right, with the internet and the connectivity, everything is connected. So when you think about what your boundaries were, it's not even the international boundaries anymore. You're affected by markets across the world, for example. So if you're in a financial firm and you have financial and non-financial risk that you're managing, real-time risk management is scanning the horizon to understand what your risk ratings are relative to what you thought they were supposed to be. But if you have a stationary, backward-looking way of scoring your risk, then you're not going to be able to react to what I think are changes that are now available in real time for you to react to. Right? You have the social media, the sentiment analysis, all kinds of things that are available. And then on the flip side, we talked about internal customers, Matt and I. We also have the regulators as a customer of ourselves as well. So we are here to serve them because they ultimately make us successful and safe for the customers that we care about. So again, you think about real-time intelligence is also understanding how the regulators want us to prove how safe we are. So you start to think about the needs of the market are changing. So real-time is not something that we want to do, it's something we have to do. So now you switch to the cloud-native version of your application. That allows you to have, we are lucky at Capital One to have the entire ecosystem on the cloud. So now as new services become available at AWS, we're able to leverage them. We're able to buy what we think are commodity products or services to tack on while we focus on features that are truly setting us apart in the integrated risk management tech space. So real time for me is not, hey, we're doing it and we're special. It's something that we think you have to do, and we are able to do it because of the cloud native aspect of our application.
Anything you want to add, Matt?
No.
Yeah, I think this makes a big difference, right? Like back in 2008 financial crisis, I know like Lehman, Bear Stearns, they all had like a large risk management teams, but they were not able to hedge. And even recently with Silicon Valley Bank, Signature, et cetera, I think it's truly not having a real-time risk management platform that caused part of the issues they faced. So let's move into security. I got a couple of questions on this. One, Capital One has been vocal about treating security as an engineering discipline. What does that look like day to day?
I'll try to take a shot at this. So, if you boil down what we do for a living in financial services, we're taking care of our customer's money, right? It's something that's very personal and very attached to a lot of their own successes and dreams. So it's something that we have to take extremely seriously. And it's actually a bedrock of, I think, how Capital One thinks. If you look at our strategies, it's always been foundationally about the customers, and since we handle a very personal part of their lives. So for me, security is a couple of versions, right? One is the data that we use, which is, again, very critical to our decisioning. At the same time, it needs to be secure. So we have pretty high sophisticated encryption for data at rest. And then when you transmit, so S3, and we have versions on AWS that we're able to leverage. And then in terms of the application itself, you have pretty interesting sophisticated identity management. And then the app level securities is something we have inherent from the cloud provided, in this case, AWS. In addition to all these three things, the developer velocity, the velocity in which we are producing code has dramatically increased in Capital One. We have a lot of engineers. So now we have to have the engineering discipline start with first being secure. So we have invested a ton of time and money in developer tools that your very first step is to be writing code that is secure. So we've come at it from all three levels because, like I said, it's extremely important to us. So we want to make sure it's done right.
Got it. Yeah, back when I was a developer, you generally build the application first, and then you go through a security review. They give recommendations, and then you just try to meet it. So I think you covered it, part of it, right? Like, was there anything specific you did to embed security into your development lifecycle than just bolting it on the end?
Like I said, step one.
Yeah.
So from the time you check code in to get the security level at the code base level, and then we've trying to stay on top of all the scans as they become available. They've gotten better and better. And again, it allows us to scan and then to remediate the vulnerabilities because we're on the cloud. Versus, trying to stay ahead of the vulnerabilities is a very key lift we get from being on the cloud and the automatic infrastructure development. Right? Infrastructure as code allows us to stay in front.
Got it. So the next session is the more interesting one, at least for me, because Capital One is one of the very few, probably the only financial institution that built its own platform. Whereas everybody else, there is strength in numbers, right? Almost every other bank buys one of the traditional GRC solution. And the challenge they face is you have one solution or one vendor for reg change management, another for like GRC, and then one for AML, one for reg reporting, and there's like many of them. The challenge they face is how do you integrate it, specifically for reporting, right? There is like redundant data in there. I'm amazed that again, 6 years ago, you guys made the decision to build it, and that too in AWS. Now, the more I see in the market, I think as the AWS features are ramping up, it makes more sense. And I also see a lot of PE companies buy these vendor solutions and licensing fees goes up. So, I mean, it's just brilliant that you guys decided 6 years ago to do it. So Matt, for you, so many organizations might default to buying GRC solution off the shelf. Why did you decide to build instead?
Yeah, ultimately, we view GRC as one of the cores of risk management. Many of our most important risk management functions as a company are in this platform, whether it's assessing risks or testing controls or managing issues and events, adhering to regulatory requirements, as you said. Those are some of the most important things we do in all of risk management are all in one place. So the functionality is critically important. And then we'd already touched on sort of the user scale. We have 10,000 users, every line of business, every line of defense. This isn't a bespoke tool for one audience. This has the biggest potential to reshape risk management as the company. So we viewed this as we want to be selective about where we're making these big investments and big bets and view GRC as one of them. Just to give a counterpoint, there's another area of risk management where we were on a path to build an in-house platform. We actually stopped that work earlier this year. And if you just put that through the same lens, it was like tens of users, not thousands of users. And they were all in one department. And there's vendor solutions that do the thing pretty good. And there's obviously pretty good GRC solutions as well, but this is an area where we don't think pretty good is good enough. This is where we can really shape how we approach risk as a company.
Solomon, anything you want to add?
First is Matt had the trust in our team to say, let's go build it, right? So that's fundamentally, that is, it was an opportunity for the engineering team as well. But for us, we did have two GRC platforms that we had bought from vendors. What we thought it lacked was the flexibility for the business. And as the business starts to reimagine risk management, like Matt, he clearly said, it's not a cost play for us. If we want to do it exceptionally well, and then when you start looking at the platforms that we were buying or we had in-house, they wouldn't allow us to do certain things the way we wanted to. So we felt like we were getting boxed in. And so we started a little bit of a peeling off layer by layer approach first. And then, like I said, the object architecture, when we got to, can we define the object, the metadata, and the interactions with them, then it started to kind of fall in place. We did have a couple of false starts. We kind of reset a little bit. But it was done for the right reasons. But we also had a very patient business because they could see the vision, and their vision was slightly aspirational, which didn't kind of work with what was in the market for us.
Got it. So Matt, back to you, right? What are some of the trade-offs, right? Between, these vendor companies spend a lot on R&D. They have a lot of peer experience building these solutions over the years. So what are some of the trade-offs that you had to deal with when you made this decision?
Yeah, I think as Solomon said, it's not like a cost play. It's not, we can do this on the cheap. But I think ultimately it comes down to that element of the flexibility and control. We can build the risk management exactly the way we want it. And, we can continually customize it. We don't need to fit our risk management into, what is the best possible solution with the container that's been given to us by a third party. We can create what we want, develop that strategy and roadmap. We have no shortage of leaders around the company coming to us with ideas. It's always a good situation to have a longer backlog than capacity to deliver it. But, when I see that, I think, gosh, I'm glad that we control this entirely ourselves versus, we'll go talk to another company and see if we can make this type of thing work.
Got it. So, I mean, my view, right, even though most of my clients are like banks in the East Coast, I've spent fair amount of time in Silicon Valley as well. I mean, their approach when I deal with CROs, CCOs is not look at like what others are there. And I felt like, from an engineering point of view, the example I use is when Uber designed the software, they didn't go and look at like what software taxi companies are using. So same way you guys didn't look at, hey, what is the leading GRC platform? Let's copy their features. So my question is, how did your engineering culture and tech capabilities make the building of this solution possible?
A couple of people in the audience are part of that journey, so I'm very proud to have them on my team. The idea of, so when you look at what the platforms were, so when we said, what are the features that we wanted to pivot on? One was the flexibility of the object handling itself. A second was the quality of data that we wanted to capture by object was key. So the metadata handling by object, and then how we wanted to interact with it was, I think, different than what the others had. They wanted to have a very straightforward workflow. So when we started to peel these things off, we said, hey, the workflow is going to be separate. The objects are going to be separate. The metadata is going to be flexible. Then we started to put those things together. Then we were able to, like I said, it was not all in. We moved a couple of objects first. The risks moved over first. The controls moved over second. So we had a path. And then when we started to see some success, and then the backlog that Matt was talking about started to load up, which means we started to see customers actually get attracted to the way we were thinking about the solution. Then I think it kind of took a second, I think the second wind was a lot different. We put a lot more investment in it. Now the number of teams increased, the kind of things we built changed as well.
Got it. And when you build the software, you didn't expect that Discover acquisition. So Discover, as you know, they were using a traditional like a GRC platform as well. So how was that integration? Now you build the solution, it's live, and obviously when you're migrating the existing data from Discover, was that like a challenge, or do you have to make any changes to your platform? How did you still manage to stay ahead of this emerging risks and regulatory expectations?
Yeah, so we haven't done the integration yet, but we are going to, and I think this is one of the big advantages we have of, we're going to bring a bunch of new users in, we're going to bring all that extra data in, and our platform is just going to scale. We are going to change some things because we're entering new business lines, we need to customize some fields, there's new sort of regulatory risks we need to consider, but again, we own the backlog and we can make that prioritization and make those changes. Ultimately, there's a huge advantage of our regulators are familiar with the way Capital One does risk management. And the way we do risk management is built into our GRC platform. So when Discover comes in, they will inherit our risk management posture simply by inheriting our software.
Got it. Anything you want to add, Solomon?
I mean, Matt kind of brushed by it, but the regulators have been a part of our journey too. It's not something we actually talked to the regulators about the fact that we are building our own platform, and that they were getting periodic updates on the platform as we built it. So that was key. And then the Discover migration, I've been through a few myself, but the way we looked at this migration was way different, simply because we owned the embedded logic that implemented the policy that we wanted to implement. So now you're like, hey, the policy is already a part of the code. So when you bring users on, you just inherit the policy. So the training aspects of it, more importantly, following, I think, our practices versus Discover practices would have been a bigger change management event than it ended up being. And then, like Matt said, we're on the path of merging with Discover over the next couple of months.
You mentioned regulators a few times, and you said regulators as a customer. I mean, generally they seem to be like an afterthought for most people. Do you give access to the regulators, or yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So, I mean, no session is complete without discussing AI. So, next question is, how do you see risk compliance and AI converging in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think all the other rooms have a lot more answers to AI than us. I think, for us, risk management is the business. So Matt and I are part of the risk management team. For us, managing the risk that AI introduces is, for me, more than as an engineer, I'm looking at AI as a fun way of solving for my customers as well. I weigh both, and I think AI in risk management is going to allow us to be this whole real time and more proactive. I think we've already seen a couple of instances where when the regulations come in, to understand the regulations, summarization and theming is already something that we have in the marketplace today. PwC has a version of the product already that is very extremely engineered. It's a beautiful product, actually. But now you're talking about Gen AI going past that, which would be themes on loads and loads of data against the history, and to see and predict and say, hey, what the risks are. I think that's going to be very exciting. And I'm assuming the regulators will have a very pointed view on how we manage risk. Do we listen to the AI model and manage risk, or do we do it ourselves? So that's going to be an interesting next couple of years. But more importantly, the fact that the product that we built, the GRC product, as we start to increase this whole, when at scale of functionality, we manage controls, risks, and issues now. Think about managing an object which is just a model. The machine learning model, LLM, small language model. These are all now things that have to be governed to perform within the boundaries of a financial services. So that, for me, I think we are positioned really well because we can now scale our GRC platform to be a part of that risk management.
Got it. So you're not really waiting for vendors to add AI capabilities because it's cloud native. When AWS releases new features, you're able to integrate it and make it future proof.
Yeah.
I know we've discussed this in the past, right? Like currently, part of the regulatory function is to do the reporting, right? You do Y9C, call report, liquidity report, daily liquidity report, right? 2052A. And the regulators use all this data to look at the stability of the bank. They also try to see, they kind of compare what they get versus the management reports with your single data model. You can make sure there is consistency. Any view on how the regulatory expectations might change over the next 3 to 5 years?
Or go to Matt. Matt meets with them every day. So,
I think the expectations will continue to rise. I think there will continue to be more of a focus on how are we leveraging AI and where should we be leveraging AI and what are the risks of AI. I think the broader risk management environment continues to get more complex. I think expectations of banks will rise over time, and we need to be able to keep pace with that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Solomon, you mentioned before, right, on how regulators, instead of using this tabulated format, which is where a lot of the effort is spent currently on doing the reporting, they could potentially access your data through API.
See, when you say you can engineer at scale, right, it goes both ways. So it's one thing for us as a company to do this, which we are on our journey. I'm assuming the regulators are on their own journey in using technology to make their governance processes better. In this case, you do a sample test, you can go to full file. If I do full file, so can the regulators, right? So now the data is on an S3 bucket on the cloud. If I can write an API call, so can they. So now you start to see the confluence of their engineering catching up, or even sometimes going faster than we are in terms of how they consume data. All of a sudden, we have to meet them there. So I feel like that's where it's going to go, and it's already starting, of all places in Australia actually, is that the regulators actually have a full file test as a part of their process. It hasn't come to the West yet, but it's not far away.
Definitely. And I've seen a number of banks, they have 3 lines of defense. Each of them do a sample-based testing, and they still miss things. And regulators come in, they're smarter on how they pick samples. And I've seen situations where they pick selected sample and find 90% error rate. They need to go redo it. And depends on what you pick, how you test it, et cetera. So the full file testing seems to be the future. And the challenge with that is access to the data, which most institutions struggle. I know CFPB tried to do that with a lot of the data collection, but I think with the current administration, that's not active. I do think it's a good opportunity, right? Now that the enforcement actions have reduced, the staffing for the regulators have reduced, and since like financial crisis, in order to banks to show that they're taking regulators seriously, they've been building up the risk management function. And I feel like now with the less scrutiny might be a perfect opportunity to go back and like automate, like, people are talking about agentic AI and other things to doing it. Looks like you guys have a good foundation for all that.
I think that exists already now, right? Yeah. So that doesn't have to be in the future. That's something we are looking at right now is the automation of the controls testing. We have data products at Capital One. We take data extremely seriously. It's very precious to us. It's what the company's founded on, is our way we analyze data to run our businesses. So you think about right now, what we're trying to tackle is the automation of the controls testing. Like we can test the controls at a much often than we do right now. The cadence can be much more frequent. So those are things that are already existing now. That's not going to be an AI play. It's going to be something that anybody with good data stewardship should be able to do. Yeah, that's one of the things that we're trying to think about as well.
Yeah, one thing I found interesting, the way you approach Solomon, is you took the software engineering. It used to be software development cycle. I develop, give it to Matt, he'll go test it, and then there is integrated testing, and then you release. So you've taken the concept of the CI/CD pipeline and brought it into risk management. Can you talk about it?
Well, the idea is, a CI/CD pipeline is essentially a risk management play on a software engineer to prevent a bug from going into production by scans and early on testing with a lot of automation. Reduces the risk of a problem happening in production. So a risk management practice is nothing different. Like you don't want a risk to realize, right? That's the sense of what we're trying to do. So now when you look at, I don't want to go into the numbers, I'm not allowed to, but we have X number of risks and we control them. And they have various scores. And so when you have something that is testable, why does it need to be tested once every 6 months? If you have the data and the testing is automatable and we have the data, then we can get to a much more frequent version of the testing is our vision. So while not the whole suite, we can't test the whole control, all the controls, we are looking at the ones that are closer to the engineering space, especially around the engineers that we have. We have a lot of software policies, risk management policies that we're trying to automate, and it's very straightforward because the data is in all the logs that we have in AWS. So we see that on the engineering side. We're like, hey, how does that look on the business side? It's a very, very interesting problem.
Definitely. So currently, you mentioned you have like 10,000 users. Does that include Discover or that's?
Not yet.
Not yet.
What do you expect the number of users to be?
Right. 15,000?
15, yeah.
That's a lot of risk management.
These are practitioners. We call them risk practitioners.
Risk practitioners.
They're involved in first line, second line. Third line wouldn't count, but third line too. Yeah, third line.
Third line's on that, yeah.
So related, Matt, you mentioned about the Net Promoter Score. So what do you do if the score goes down? I know it's been like
I mean, we poll all of our users twice a year. And, it's sort of, to me, one of the most important exercises we get throughout the year of getting all of that feedback, out of that. We might, ask thousands of users for feedback, get, 500 responses, and a lot of people are writing detailed comments. They're really pouring through those to understand, like, what are the pain points and what could be even better, and using that to shape the roadmap in the future. Ideally, this is like you're not learning a lot because it's every 6 months. And one of the highlights of our job is that our users work in the same buildings as us. So we should be able to just walk around and say, hey, how's it going? And like hear things without having to wait for a big survey. But it's a great touch point to like check in and make sure and confirm. And we've definitely had times when, things were going wrong and we didn't know about them until it's like, wait a minute, 12 people said this thing. Like, did you know this was happening? I didn't know this was happening. And then we can jump all over it. So we look for all those opportunities to, continue to make sure the score is going in the right direction.
Awesome. All right. So with respect to some closing questions, I have like a few. So Matt, for you, if you had to pick one key lesson from this journey, what would you tell peers who are just beginning their GRC modernization?
Don't do it. No, seriously, I think probably the most important thing is know what you're getting yourself into. It's not for the faint of heart. It's a big investment. It takes a lot of time, and typically we like to develop software in an MVP form. Like, let's just ship like a little bit, we'll get feedback, we'll iterate on it. But this is an environment where it's often like, well, you can't flip all of your risk management over if it's like, it doesn't really work yet. It has to be at least as good as the thing you're replacing before you go live. So it can lead to longer development cycles than we'd like to have. As I said, it's a big investment. It can take a lot of time. But I have felt the journey is incredibly worthwhile. But I think, if you think you can like dabble your way into it, or like, this will be like a little side project and it will come to fruition, I think you need to go in eyes wide open with understanding the level of investment and time commitment.
Anything you want to add, Solomon?
I think change management was key. I would say we did a pretty good job in anticipating what it means to change the tires out while still reporting to the regulators on your existing platform. So risk management never stops. You could swap the software all day long, but you're still held accountable every quarter to the board, to the regulators and examiners. So in our case, I think the change management was done really well. The harder thing was, the customer feedback, not knowing what they want initially, and then we're trying to, change into a different way of thinking almost. So that was kind of a little bit, but then, like Matt said, the NPS has been a great indicator of us headed in the right direction or not. And you have to understand, we are, our release velocities are a few hundred a month. So we're putting features behind feature flags, we're deploying them, and we have started to now even go past the NPS to say, by feature behind a feature flag, can you tell us how you feel about it? So the experimentation changes have started to kick in. This is all, again, evolution of you building software on the cloud, and the things it allows you to do are a lot different. So now we started to see even different user interaction patterns, and user feedback loops are different. So it's been pretty cool the last few months.
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, right, like you're having your own strong risk management platform as being like a differentiator. And from the sense, like when regulators approved the Discover transaction, that was part of the reason. Like everybody is like, hey, I'm using the software every other bank uses, and the data is as good as it gets, versus like owning this and using this platform reduced your enforcement actions and any outstanding. I really think that's what like got you approval to buy Discover. So on the other end, right, I see still like a lot of large financial institutions even hesitant to go to cloud, right? Like forget like building risk management on their own. They are like, oh, we want the latest solution that's like a cloud platform, but we want like an on-prem version of it. So what is your advice to organizations that are hesitant to leap into cloud native risk management?
Well, I'm like, hey, you guys are at the AWS conference, so I'm assuming it's not the people in the room. But those of you watching online, I don't think anybody's watching live, but it's just it's not even a differentiator anymore. The cloud, it's a necessity to stay at par. You're batting at par, with the cloud, or else you're just going to get left behind. And then you look at risk management. Like I said, risk management has to be a lot different than you did it before. It's not simple credit decisioning or credit modeling. That's not the only way you're going to survive the market. I think as AI brings in newer products that are customized at scale by individual user, right? The mobile revolution is done, right? There's like 7.5 billion handhelds in the world. So you're already customized by individual already. So then you're thinking financial products that are customized by this individual having a handheld across the world, and then the risk of that, right? Matt also is our head of our second line fraud as well, so he's got another hat he wears half the day, and it's even more interesting when you start to think about risk management in the fraud space. So I just feel like if you're not on the cloud, you can't anticipate, you can't react, and then I don't know how you exist in the marketplace as a financial services firm. So it's going to be key. So if there's someone here at the conference and doesn't have the cloud, I would highly recommend the cloud to you guys.
No, thank you. And then, Matt, to you, to wrap up, right, what does future-ready risk organization look like to you?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point we started with of real-time intelligent risk management, where we are surfacing insights to users based on all the data that we've gathered. We are helping business leaders around the company to anticipate what their risks might be and what could go wrong versus reacting when things do go wrong. We're leaning in on generative AI and using that to automate and build quality into our workflows and decisions. I think it's I think we're on a journey to get there, but I think it's a dramatically different worldview when you're really managing risks in that proactive way.
Awesome. Matt and Solomon for taking your time, and thanks everyone for joining the session. I know it's tough to find the room. We got to walk past all the free swag and the casino. So thank you so much for joining, and feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn and message there, or we can meet outside to answer any other questions.
Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you.